at the moment, it feels like the seed growing is the kind of the easy part. It's the part that I'm like, okay, I know what I'm doing here. And it's the running a seed company, the starting a farm, which is much more new and all absorbing at the moment.
Welcome to episode 20 of the Seed Farmer Podcast. I'm Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Tournesol Cooperative Farm and spreadsheet and crop planning enthusiast, author of the upcoming book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seeds. This book is available from no-till growers and other places fine books are sold. With the Seed Farmer Podcast, I want you to get inspired to go out and grow some seed on your farm. Ellen Rignell is this episode's guest. Ellen has many years' experience growing seeds from her time at Trill Farms and as a program coordinator for the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Program. But in this interview, we catch Ellen at a new part of her seed journey as she's finishing her first growing season at Winnow Farm Seeds, her very own seed company based in Dorset in the UK. In this episode, we discuss what Ellen wants from this new business, and we discuss all the things other than growing seed that you need to know when launching a seed business. Ellen explains how she wants her farm to be open to folks coming to the site to learn about seeds and to give them an opportunity to get their fingers in the soil. Ellen talks about her collaboration with Lucy and Emma of Meadowsweet Flowers and Floristry. In the deep dive, Ellen and I talk about growing parsnips for seed, the importance of sloping shoulders to drive rain away, whether to stake flowering parsnips or not, and do parsnip seeds live up to the reputation as bad germinators with limited storage life? At the end of the conversation, Ellen goes into the opportunities to grow seed in a market growing context, to take advantage of gaps in your crop plan, and to better use farm labor. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Before we start the show, let's get a word from the Seed Farmer show sponsors.
Hello, everyone. This is Owen Taylor.
And this is Chris Bolden Newsom of True Love Seeds. We are farmers who run a seed company to preserve our ancestral plant relatives from all over the world and share our seeds with gardeners and farmers seeking out their beloved tastes of home.
We also have a podcast we think you will enjoy. It's called Seeds and Their People. We interview growers about the plants that keep their culture thriving.
Tune in wherever you listen to podcasts and at trueloveseeds.com.
All right, everyone, important public service announcement. I know some of you are already making plans for how you'll spend the winter, ordering tools, researching seeds, projecting crops. It's also a great time to gather with our farmers to share knowledge and skills. This February, join thousands of farmers like you from across the U.S. for 3 days of community building and farmer-led learning at the 36th Annual Marble Seed Organic Farming Conference in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Find out more and register at marbleseed.org/conference. All right, back to the show. Hi, Ellen. Welcome to the Seed Farmer Podcast. I first met you virtually when you were working at Trill Farm, and then I met you again through the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Program. And now I've seen that you're starting your own seed company. So I really wanted to have you on to kind of explore all these different aspects of working with seed that you've done.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Really kind of exciting time for me at the moment with this kind of, this new project. I think it's almost a strange time to come on a podcast because everything is so new and there's lots of ideas and a bit of kind of vagueness around how we're kind of working. I think it's also a really exciting time and a time that I suppose other people might gain quite a lot from our beginning stages.
I think those beginning stages are so important. And they're also really important because even though you're at a beginning stage of a certain type, you're not a new seed grower. So you're approaching that with a different reflection than if you were just jumping in, having no experience.
And actually, I would say that at the moment it feels like the seed growing is the kind of the easy part. It's the part that I'm like, okay, I know what I'm doing here, and it's the kind of the running a seed company, the starting a farm, which is much more new and all absorbing at the moment.
I bet it is. Do you want to guide our listeners through your seed story and tell us how you've come to this new exciting adventure?
Yeah. So I grew up in a very kind of like just an urban seaside town called Brighton, in the southeast of England, in a house with a tiny courtyard garden. So I don't have this like very strong connection to agriculture or seed production in terms of my upbringing. Yeah, I suppose in other ways, like my mum was a really keen kind of amateur botanist and ecologist, and she'd take us on these really long walks and collect seeds and, you know, flowers and leaves and all of this kind of thing, and tell us the Latin names of plants and this kind of thing. And of course, me and my siblings absolutely hated it. And we would just, you know, be like, Mom, we don't want to go on another walk. But it's obviously rubbed off on me because I feel really kind of at home in the outdoors. And it's the same for my siblings as well, this kind of real connection and sort of feeling held in that environment. My dad was also a keen grower in his own right. Even though we had this very small sort of courtyard space, he would grow tomatoes in a little lean-to greenhouse and basil and, you know, all sorts of different herbs. And he's an amazing cook. We're one of those families that when we meet up, it's not like, okay, so what are we going to do? It's like, what's for dinner? And that's the only thing we're sort of interested in. So this food connection, I think, is a really strong thread for me throughout my seed story. But yeah, I suppose in many ways, I'm like trained as a botanist. So I went to university and studied botany. I hated it, actually, for the first 2 years. I absolutely hated it. But then I kind of got to the third year and suddenly everything started to click. And I took this module, I think it was in soil science, with this professor called Jonathan Leake, who was really, really brilliant. And he did a lecture on kind of sustainable agriculture, one of the first ones in the module. And he had all those graphs up about soil erosion and the pollution caused by industrial agriculture and all of this kind of thing, really built it up and up. And then he said, well, we need people like you to go into farming. That's what we need. And then he said, but none of you will. And I thought, oh, maybe that's something I could do. But I ended up working with him on a project during the time I was at university, looking at mycorrhizal associations and plant health and all of this kind of thing. And I found it so interesting, really brought together the botany and the plant sciences into real life, those kind of connections, and really kind of adding in that sort of sustainability question and those kind of interactions between fungi and plants and all of this like really exciting, interesting stuff that is being built on so much at the moment in terms of scientific research and in terms of like the organic community in the UK as well. That was kind of my training. And then I suppose seed didn't really feature in that particularly, is more strongly to do with like agriculture. And I went on to sort of straight out of university, managed to get a job in the plant pathology department in a organization called the National Institute of Agricultural Botany. And I was working in the plant pathology department, looking at disease resistance on specific broadleaf crops. So looking at oilseed rape and broad beans, peas, this kind of thing. And my job was essentially to grow all of these diseases in the lab, mix them all up with a load of water in a blender, and then spray them all on all of these crops that we've grown. And then I carefully document how those crops died. And it was, after a while, I just got really fed up with, killing plants all day. I was like, no, not another one. There was a point where I decided this is the time to kind of move on from that. And at that time, my partner got really into wooden boat building, and he decided he wanted to do a course in the southwest of England. And that's when I moved down to the Dorset Devon border and started working at Trill Farm Garden, which you mentioned at the beginning, which really was the big start of my kind of journey into like organic growing and really doing the kind of practical stuff. Because up until then, I hadn't really got my hands dirty except for growing all of these diseases. I wasn't, I wasn't, really in contact with the soil. I was in contact with the plants, but not with the soil. That was a very kind of like absorbing, transformative experience. Amazing, amazing place to work. And I started off doing a traineeship there and ended up staying there.
When you started this, and so I know there was the challenge from your professor, but at this point, did you think that you were starting a career as a farmer, or was this just like an experience because circumstances allowed it?
I knew that I wanted to be working in a practical job. I didn't know that it was definitely farming at that point, and outside as well. So I was also kind of dabbling in like coppicing and maintenance gardening as well. I spent a time working in subtropical gardens. I was kind of like exploring all of that sort of thing, but obviously the farming thing was really in my mind, because I ended up committing to doing a traineeship at Trill Farm Garden and then was there for 7 years after that. So it's a really kind of exciting place. And that is where I started to learn about seed and get really excited about it. So at Trill, they grow sort of a handful of crops for the Real Seed catalogue. They're a seed catalogue based in Wales, and they're one of the most experienced seed producers in the UK, organic seed producers in the UK, that we as a kind of community really kind of look up to them and get a lot of. They're amazing mentors. They've really been mentoring me this year. They're brilliant people. But they're given Ash and Kate, who run Trill Farm Garden, the opportunity to grow a few seed crops for them on contract, which I think is a fairly sort of standard way of doing it. And I ended up kind of taking responsibility for the seed production at Trill while I was there. And we grew a whole kind of diversity of things. So easy stuff like tomatoes and things like that. But then we kind of found that biennials worked really, really nicely in terms of the production system. So yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
That sounds great.
But that marrying your production system to seed crops is a bit of trial and error, but it feels very, very important part of working out how to grow seeds successfully in a market garden, I think. And so during my time at Trill, I also got a part-time job for working for the Gaia Foundation Seed Sovereignty Program, which is inspired by the Bouter Initiative in Canada.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's, that was the big inspiration. And my job was being the sort of program coordinator in the southwest of England. So I'd work with a kind of network of all of the growers or like organic and agroecological growers in the region who are interested in growing seed, but perhaps need some kind of support, often it was training, to be honest. At the time I was there, things have moved on quite a lot now. So people are need a whole diversity of things. But at the time I was there was a lot of training.
Was this at the same time as you were at Trill Farm, or is this like?
Yes. Yeah. So that was it. It was an amazing place to be because I had this like market garden experience and the space at Trill to work with, and Ash's expertise in seed production as well, and Kate and Ben's at the Real Seed catalogue. And we could host groups at the farm and run trainings and talk about the kind of difficulties involved in trying to produce seed when you're also producing however many tons of salad for chefs, and veg boxes need to go out and all of that kind of thing, because they are quite different systems. One of the amazing things that happened while I was at the seed program is that our manager managed to get us funded to go to the OSA conference in Oregon. So I got to do that a few years ago. And that, I know you've talked on the podcast before about it being a really kind of transformative experience. And that for me was really, really transformative. So exciting to see, but just a kind of this real kind of like broadened outlook of what things could look like in the UK. Things are I would say, quite far behind the US from what I saw, what I can see around the place, and going to Oregon and sort of seeing what was happening, both in terms of like what people are growing, how they're growing it, but also the connection to kind of food and culture and just the kind of vibrancy around that was so inspiring. And it was there that I was like, I think I'm going to start a seed farm. But I didn't tell anyone. Only my partner. Yeah. What an amazing conference. If you can get there, it is the thing to do. And then I suppose after that, a few months after that, I was pregnant with my first child. And from then on, I had kind of a few low-key years where I was doing bits and pieces of work. So working at the Seed Sovereignty program, delivering trainings and things like that, bits of work at Trill and all this kind of thing, just kind of making things work, but also sort of laying a little bit of groundwork in terms of building up partnerships, working out land opportunities, funding opportunities, these kind of things, getting them into place while I was having kids. And yeah, here we are. I've started a new seed business.
Is this your first growing year?
Yes. So it's our second year on the site. So 2 years ago, we registered it for organic conversion because it wasn't previously in organic certified. And then this year is the first year we've kind of cultivated and built infrastructure. And this year it's been a big kind of building year. I imagine next year will be as well, to be honest. We've put in some infrastructure and trying to make a farm, which I've never done before. And that didn't occur to me that would be a challenge when I first began. But I've always worked in places where it's already pretty well set up. So it's been really interesting, and I've learned a lot.
So now you have to be the person setting it up. So when someone else comes to work, they're like, oh, wow, that's all perfect.
Yeah. Give me 10 years. So shall I tell you a bit about, I could tell you a bit about the kind of the seed company, I suppose.
I'd love to hear about what you're hoping the seed company is and becomes.
It's interesting when you're kind of dreaming about what you're going to grow, what you want to be able to offer, for me, gardeners and things like that. And a lot has just comes out of sort of your personality and your preferences when you're kind of beginning something. And the things that I get really that I'm really into are this idea. So open pollinated varieties that are really, really robust and just kind of grow for people. So I'm not interested in things that you have to kind of mollycoddle them to kind of get them to produce something. I've worked with a lot of different gardeners, and some people get a real thrill out of growing something that's very difficult to grow. I'm not that person. I like it to be easy. And I want...
I can relate to that. I really like the easy things too.
And then the other thing that I'm sort of vegetables and herbs wise, like I said, I'm meal planning as I'm crop planning. I want to be able to kind of eat this stuff. So I'm thinking about the kind of like culinary attributes. And I think something that's often is maybe starting to be talked about more now, but I suppose people in the UK think it's like a tomato is just a tomato, but actually there's lots of different varieties that are for specific different reasons. You grow them for different dishes. So like, one's for making sauce with, or cherry tomatoes are very different from a salad tomato, all of this kind of thing, that there's all of this specificity, I suppose, in a way, in terms of how things are bred. They're bred for specific reasons, to eat them in specific ways. So being really clear about the hows and the whys behind the varieties in the catalogue. So a really strong kind of trialing thread going through the farm at the moment, which almost can get a bit out of control, to be honest. It's like I have to keep reminding myself I have to grow seeds as well. But there needs to be some kind of formula to kind of like manage. It's like you're allowed 4 crops each year, go wild, trialing.
I like 10 to 15% as a number.
Oh, that's good. There you go. You got the formula. I'll write that down. So robust varieties. And then we're also doing cut flower seeds. So that are really beautiful, and I will talk a little bit more about that later. So I suppose really important to me is this, it's not just this food connection, but this people connection as well. And from the very beginning, I wanted the farm to be open and to be able to kind of invite people to be part of it and talk about seed and the growing as well, but particularly from a seed perspective, because I think often people don't hear about that. There's a lot about farming and agriculture, but not a lot about seed and the different sorts of flowers and all of, the botany around it all. It's all so interesting. From the very beginning, we sort of sought out funding to run from our local council to run volunteer days so that we can have people up regularly, and the council essentially pay us for our time and have provided us with subsidised tools and things like that. And as well, we host these nature connection days, which are for groups from Bridport, our local town, who need access to the outdoors for various reasons. I mean, don't we all? But our most recent group was a group of people that are suffering mental ill health, maybe anxiety or depression, all sorts of things, and just a chance to kind of host them at the farm and be outside of their kind of normal environment. And we know that like the outdoors and even touching the soil is incredibly important for mental health. And to be honest, for me at the farm, it's such a boost having people from outside of it coming in and being able to sort of talk to them about what's going on, and you sort of realize like, oh, that's interesting to talk about, or that's interesting to see, or so we've loved that. And I also got some funding from Natura. Do you know Natura?
I don't know Natura.
They are essentially a fruit and vegetable wholesaler. I think they're in North America. They have this something called the Young Farmer Fund, and they offer grants to put into farmers who are under the age of 35, I think. So I just sort of slipped in underneath the age range, and they have given me some funding, partly for some infrastructure projects, but also to host some seed to table events where I'm going to work with some local chefs and cafes and host things at the farm. We're going to do them so that this is for next season. They'll sort of mirror the equinox solstice sort of dates, and we'll host people at the farm, have lots of nice food. I guess it's like an ancient practice of sitting together and podding sound, threshing.
You want to set up a farm-based seed company that's doing all kinds of other community-based activities and education activities. And I guess that can help also get the business on its foot, as you might not have the sales volume that you need to cash flow your business.
Exactly. And in a way, it's kind of like an idealist thing of like, we want people to be involved with this, but in a sense, it's also kind of quite canny to be thinking, okay, how are we going to make this work in the early years? And it's not tons of money coming in, but it's like a little bit more to be able to, just feel like something's happening and survive and and all those things. It's felt like a good thing. And also you're kind of like generating a bit of buzz around like locally, that's the market I'm most interested in, kind of like galvanizing, is like all these local people talking to each other and being like, oh, have you heard what's going up at X, Y, and Z? And, oh, you should come with us and you should buy some seeds, ideally.
You've also mentioned to me before this interview that you're in collaboration with Lucy and Emma from Meadowsweet Flowers and Floristry on this site. Can you tell a little bit about that relationship? And was it important in you choosing this location?
So, yes. So I met Lucy and Emma at Trill Farm Garden. They were both growers there. Emma has for years been running the Meadowsweet Flowers and Floristry business. She's incredibly knowledgeable about flower growing and floristry foraging and all sorts of exciting things. Now, so we decided quite early on that we wanted to find a site together. And I have been really inspired by a group of growers in the north of England called Sheffield Organic Growers. And their whole concept is that they have this peri-urban growing site. And it's this really big field, and they've divided it up into sections. And each section is like leased out by an individual grower, but they have a communal barn and they have quite a lot of communal equipment. And I thought, I went to Sheffield University, so that's my connection with Sheffield. And so I've known a lot about it, and it's always been in my mind. It was like, that is a really intelligent way of going about things, because you are minimizing your costs because all of that, your infrastructure is shared. But you're also getting that amazing kind of camaraderie that you get from having tea breaks together and, having time together, and just those like little conversations where you're like, oh God, the slugs are awful this year. Yeah, the slugs are awful this year or whatever. Those kind of connections I think are really important, but you don't have the kind of intensity of working collaboratively or as a co-op. So in my mind, I always thought, okay, that's a really interesting idea. And we're kind of vaguely the same. So like we're a 3-acre site, and there are 2 businesses that are based there. There's Winnow Farm Seeds, there's Meadowsweet Flowers and Floristry. And we do all of that kind of thing, like sharing the infrastructure. We've shared the time putting up, like building the infrastructure as well, share the rent, all of these kind of things, which are fantastic. We actually work together a lot more closely than they do at Sheffield Organic Growers. So we share our labour as well. And that at the moment is working really brilliantly, I think, in particularly because we are putting in a lot of infrastructure, and it's just a lot of work to get the ground into production. And that's all of our jobs, if you see what I mean. So it's kind of, it works really well from that perspective. And then there's, I think, a few things that are sort of exciting about working with flower growers, and with them. And one of those is a kind of personal reason, and then the other is seed-related reason. So we can get back to seeds. But I was talking, the personal reason is, I guess, personal, practical in a way. It's just meant that we can, so myself, Lucy and Emma, are able to be quite flexible with our work. So, for example, this year, Emma has had a baby and she's been on maternity leave, doing little bits and pieces of work, but she's really had that time to like focus on, bringing up her son. Similarly, but there's still me and Lucy there making things happen. Slowly things are kind of growing, and she knows that she's got that to come back to, and that kind of like a safety net really of like, yeah, okay, little things have happened, we built some stuff, come and grow some flowers, brilliant. Bish bash wash, great. And for me, it's brilliant because we've all got these kind of like responsibilities, kids, parents who need extra support, doing whatever. And this is why it's so good to be that kind of like group of people doing something, rather than it being, say, just my project, working alone in a field in the middle of nowhere. It's yeah. And there's something about working with one or two other people that makes you feel like you're able to take on much, much bigger projects than you would alone. It's kind of weird confidence.
You're not limited by your own mind or your own body.
Exactly. Yeah, you just convince each other that you can do anything. And then the other reason it's really been really sort of interesting for me is that, so we've grown so many flowers, and I've just been introduced to this whole totally sort of different in a way, the selection criteria and what you're looking at and the florist kind of mindset. It's so interesting in terms of, looking for things like how things are growing and different kind of colors. And I just like learning sort of new things. And I think there's very much a gap in the UK cut flower seed market that's, I think, really interesting to explore how we might be able to serve that gap. I don't know whether to talk about this a bit later, or shall I talk
Why don't we talk about it right now?
Okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose this robustness thing. What I've been really kind of personally coming up against as we're growing all of these flowers is that quite a few of them are really challenging to grow in the UK in our climate situation.
Maybe I would interrupt you now to ask you to talk about your climate situation and how that affects growing seed. And then we can come back to flowers.
So the climate thing. So we're based in Dorset, southwest of England. We're about 5 miles away from the sea. So we're inland, but we've got a strong maritime influence. Very temperate. We're farming in an area called the Marshwood Vale, which I always think like that doesn't sound like a good place to be farming. Marsh, wood, but it's sort of fine. The soil is a kind of loamy clay, so it's on the heavier side. But I've only really ever worked on soils with the heavier side, so I'm kind of like, it's just like my normal.
You're used to the challenge.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I'd know what to do with a sort of sandy soil. But the downside of it is that the sort of subsoil is a heavy clay that doesn't drain very quickly in the spring. We're on a bit of a slope, so it's not too bad for the local area. And we've been kind of pleasantly surprised by after cultivating this year. So I think there's two main things about our climate. And the first is that it's mild, especially if you're thinking, I'm thinking I don't know loads about, obviously it's really cold where you are, is what I'm trying to say.
we get a bit of snow, we get a bit of cold in the winter. Yeah.
So even in the UK, we are very mild. So I looked up I looked up rain and stuff like that. But so we don't get a frost until and actually we're in this weird sort of slither of land where it just seems to stay really mild, because that is not the same at Trill's only a few miles away, and it's not the same there. They get them much earlier. So I don't really understand what the geography or weather pattern thing is, but we're just in a really mild section of this coast. Maybe it's like the hills or some. Anyway, I'm not going to start to think about that now. So it's really mild. And then our last frost, and just to say, it is possible that we would get a frost before that, but you're kind of, it's just not that
it's not
cold.
As common.
Exactly. And we sort of aim for imagining that the last frost will be mid-May, but often it's before that in reality. So it's not very much cold weather, which in a way, that's nice. Oh, we don't get any snow either. Like we might get a bit, but it's rarely settles. it usually just goes all sludgy. We might get a few days, but
a little bit of bad driving, and then
yeah. It's the sort of, I suppose a way to describe it is like overnight it dips down below zero, and then over the course of the day thaws out, kind of thing. And then so I would like more frost, to be honest, because I think it helps deal with slugs and snails and all of this kind of thing. And we have the size of some of these slugs, they must be like 50 years old. They're so big.
How big is a big slug? You want to tell us, so that for those who can't see on the podcast?
What, at least the size of the palm of your hand, like reaching the fingers. It's horrible. Yeah, and they can eat a lot as well. So yeah, very mild. I suppose in terms of seed, that means that we can overwinter stuff, no problem really, like chard, well, obviously like parsnips and brassicas and things like that. Rodent damage is obviously a problem, so a lot of the roots will take in. And
is it cold enough to vernalize those crops? Like those, they will go to seed.
Yeah, it's beautiful in terms of that. Yeah, it's cold enough to vernalize. It is often not that it needs to get super, super cold, but it just needs to be that certain amount of time, doesn't it, of cool. It doesn't have to be like frozen. So yeah, that doesn't seem to be a problem. Yeah, so the problem is the rain.
I was wondering about that.
So we're at the close of the summer, and we've had such a wet summer this year. There's no month where you can reliably be like, we are not going to get rain this month. So that obviously creates difficulties with seed. So the obvious thing is that it's getting things dry towards the end of the season. So often we get a washout August, and that is when a lot of your annual seed crops are maturing, and some biennials as well. So that can be really challenging. And I haven't, because I've only had this one season on this site, I haven't got an exact way of sort of dealing with it. It just kind of is what it is. And it's wet. And I suppose then the other issue is that getting these plants it's cultivation. So it's like we get these really wet springs, and it can be really like difficult to kind of cultivate the land early on enough to get stuff in. It always does dry out, so but it's about having all of your sort of ducks in a row so that you can just kind of go straight at it, and having lots of things in modules that can kind of already go out, and working out what needs to be grown in modules and planted out to have that extra length of season, and what you can direct sow and kind of get away with.
When you're saying modules, that's like transplants, like yes, okay.
Yeah.
I haven't used that term, but is that kind of like the cells in a cell tray?
So we call them module trays, and the transplants we call modules, but transplants is good too. I'm just using.
I was pretty sure I knew what you were talking about.
Yeah. So the wet is difficult. Got loads of fans, so that helps with sort of drying things out. Tunnel space. Really, really important for that, like post-ripening kind of process, post-harvest ripening.
Are you growing anything in tunnels to keep them dry during the summer?
Yeah, so we've just got our tunnel up this year. So this year, nothing's been in the tunnel wasn't there to have anything in there. A lot of what there's a lot of things that do need to be grown in the tunnel, like second year of carrots and that kind of thing. Where it's just really important, that they ripen properly. Onions, that kind of thing, really important to use. The tunnel for. But you're always kind of weighing that up with your summer crops that you want to produce. See, the tomatoes, the peppers, the aubergines, and then we have this additional thing of, because we're also a flower farm, if I want to say grow a particular variety of cosmos for seed, that needs to be, under protected. Yeah, it needs to be in an isolation in the tunnel. So they fill up quickly, is what I'm saying.
I haven't asked you about your total acreage. And so I'm curious, how much acreage are you growing in garden, and how much is in tunnel? Maybe now, but like, how much would you like it to be in the future?
I mean, this is a really good question. I'm quite committed to really trying to do as much outdoor production as possible. This is because I think that the people who are growing the seed will be growing it outside. So in terms of the selection process, I like things to kind of go through that sort of the kind of difficulties, I suppose, associated with growing outside compared to in a tunnel.
Let's take a quick break and hear from our show sponsors. The goal of the Culinary Breeding Network is to improve communication between plant breeders, seed growers, farmers, chefs, produce buyers, and others to improve quality in vegetables, fruits, and grains. The Culinary Breeding Network creates unique opportunities to taste in development cultivars where everyone can share opinions and be a participant in variety development. Inviting chefs, farmers, and everyday eaters into the breeding process increases public awareness and understanding of organic plant breeding. To learn more about the Culinary Breeding Network and find out about upcoming events, visit www.culinarybreedingnetwork.com and follow on Instagram. Are you a farmer looking for educational resources in Canada? Check out Young Agrarians. They are a farmer-to-farmer educational resource network for new and young ecological, organic, and regenerative farmers. Young Agrarians offers farmer-to-farmer programming, including tools and training around farming, business, mentorships, land access, and so much more. Interested in learning more? Head to youngagrarians.org and give Young Agrarians a follow on social media. All right, back to the show.
I'm just going to repeat what you said for the listeners because it's important. So what you're saying is you want to be selecting the vegetable part of the crop in the conditions that it's going to be grown by the end user, the gardeners or the farmers. That's what you're...
Exactly.
So that means that you don't want to pamper it too much. You want to have it in comparable weather and those kind of things so that they don't have to pamper it extra.
Yes, exactly.
But then when it gets to the seed, and maybe this is where you're going at the seed part, you can do that differently because that's not, unless it's tomatoes, but they're not, often the seed part is different than the vegetable part.
Yeah, it's very different in terms of the experience of the end user. But then I suppose also if you're thinking, years down the line, do I still want to be producing this thing in a tunnel? Then that's fine. But if you're thinking, oh, actually, it would be nice to select for a seed crop that might produce outside, and all of these different species have different limitations, and it's kind of a bit about kind of choosing your focus, isn't it? You can't do everything. But yeah, so in terms of our total acreage, we've got 3 acres. That's the size of the field. Within that, we have a 40 by 80 meter polytunnel.
So that's about a 12th of an
is.
acre, maybe? A 13th of an acre?
Cool. But we have plans to put up at least another couple of tunnels. I think realistically it will need to be that.
So maybe like a half acre.
Yeah. And then the rest outside. So a fair amount of tunnel space, I think. But yeah, we're not a massive operation. My dream is that we have another isolation plot, but I am very far off that.
Get one thing under control before you create another thing.
Yeah. And it's the sort of thing that there aren't sort of tons of opportunities for growers to grow seed in the UK. And kind of in my mind, I'm thinking this second isolation could be something else for someone else to manage. Because I don't need to manage everything, So it might be a nice opportunity for if something comes up to do something like that. Shall I talk a little bit about our facilities as they
Definitely.
are and the things that we are currently putting in place? So the 3 acres, so that's our main field. I've talked about the soil and what it's like to grow there. We're leasing the land. We have a 10-year lease on the land, which is very good for roundabout us. So we're thrilled to be there and a really good relationship with our landlords. So I just think that is priceless. And we also rent a big agricultural barn. I don't know how big it is, but just trust me, it's big enough for everything. And there's a lot of old barns on the farm. So there's scope to kind of colonize other barns as we go if we need more space for the businesses. Now there's an ongoing project, and this is another kind of local council funded project, which we've got this. West Dorset Council is brilliant, and they've got an agenda to kind of diversify a lot of the farms around us towards a kind of more sustainable way of managing them. So the Marshwood Vale, where we farm, is traditionally a kind of dairy farming area. And I mean, farms are kind of leaving dairy farming in their droves because of the price of milk and so on, but also that they're kind of being incentivized to shift to more kind of what is it called, agritourism and things like that, and also kind of sustainable land management. So lots of wildflowers and hedgerows and all of this kind of thing. They can get subsidies for all of that kind of management stuff. So all over the Marshwood Vale, as part of that dairy production, the cows are housed in barns. So there's, do you know what I mean if I say a slurry pit?
I definitely know, but why don't you tell the listeners?
So the cows are housed in barns, and all of their poo goes into a big pit, essentially. That is what the slurry pits are. And they're these terrifying, actually, because the idea of falling into one is like the worst death in the world.
We had one of our farm dogs fell into a slurry pit at the neighbors, and we didn't know when it happened, but he came back, and he was covered in manure except for his muzzle, like the tip of his nose. And
oh my God.
And he was so happy to be home, and I guess he probably fell in, and it took him a while to figure a way to get out. But we might not have known otherwise.
That's amazing that he got out.
He was quite the dog. He was really an amazing dog.
Oh, nice. So there's all over the Marshwood Vale, there's these slurry pits. And the Ines who owns our farm, she really thought it would be a great idea to look at whether we can convert the old slurry pit into a reservoir for the field. We've had this council funding to fit guttering to these massive barns that are either side, and now the pit has been all kind of cleaned out, and it's refilling with rainwater over winter because we get an abundance of winter rain, and then we do sometimes, with the weather being, with climate change, etc., we do get periods of drought. They're just very erratic in the summer.
Not enough that you can plan around it.
No, no, you can't. This is the thing. You think so. Like the year before, it was 2 years ago, it was a drought year. So it's very kind of hard to manage. I suppose one of the nice things about growing seed compared to growing vegetable, well, especially like salad vegetables, is you don't need that same like high input of irrigation. You can kind of water things in really thoroughly at the beginning and then just be like, okay, guys, now you go. Which I like that kind of growing. So back to the back to the barn. So we've got that reservoir, we've got the barn. I have a kind of walk-in fridge that I'm still working out the setup at the moment, but it's going to have a kind of dehumidifier in there to take moisture out of the seeds. And I think I might try and get my hands on another one for kind of even sometimes it can be difficult to get things dry enough to thresh them in the tunnel when it's late on in the season. So it might be nice to have an extra space to kind of do that. And then another fridge, which is about kind of really reducing down the humidity or the moisture in the seeds so that they store really well. This is something that was really impressed upon me by Real Seeds. They have this amazing drying room, which they use to just reduce down that moisture, and the impact of that on the storage life of the seed is just, and the quality of it, all of this kind of thing it's so important. So we're going to try and kind of replicate that sort of thing. And then in terms of, I suppose, how we clean the seeds, all of that kind of thing, we're at the moment working on quite a low-tech sort of basis. So we've got sticks, we've got sheets, we've got fans, all that sort of thing. We've got screens. Got loads of screens actually, which is great. And we have something called a zigzag cleaner, which
is that the Real Seeds cleaner?
Yeah, their open source design. You can find that on their website, which is great for smaller lots of seeds. And we've also been blessed with a DIY winnow wizard as well. And Lucy, her dad is a wizard of his own sort, and he's kind of followed the plans and made it. But we haven't. Well, it's complicated, but we haven't managed to test it out yet. So that's still in the works. And at the moment, we are managing quite nicely with the screens and the fans and so on. So, and the zigzag cleaner. So that's going to be all systems go for next year. And office-wise, there's a building in our garden at the moment that has been well and truly colonized with seeds and things.
So I think that we should probably start pivoting more to talk shop, but I feel like we left a little bit of an open loop about the flower seed. Is there anything you want to just say shortly to kind of close up? I think where we were at was you were talking about the challenges with moisture and flower seed.
Yeah, so I suppose I was talking about what we've been really noticing this year in terms of growing flowers. And so we're growing all sorts of things outside, and there would be particular varieties that we say that is a polytunnel variety or that is a greenhouse variety. It does not grow well outside. And I really want to be able to kind of do a bit of that, this thing about robust varieties. I want a bit more of that kind of refinement in flower seed, which I don't think is kind of offered in the same way it is in vegetable varieties. Often like a new amazing colour is bred, and I don't think there's that additional breeding for the UK climate, which is like it is just wet, and it's wet. So, and we don't have that kind of like heat that a lot of the flowers enjoy. So what we're looking at things like, say, plant architecture, that kind of thing. So things that don't just like totally flop over once you've had a downpour. Stuff like the colouring as well, because some flowers can kind of take a little bit of rain damage, whereas others, they just look awful, and that's that. There's no going back from it. So kind of looking at which varieties really kind of work from that perspective. And I think that's a really exciting thing to add to our catalogue. We've also got very early days breeding projects going on that we are very excited about, but actually I don't really have anything to show for them. They're just happening. We'll see what comes out next year, and check in, sort of watch the space in 5-10 years.
So let's talk parsnips then. Well, why don't you tell us why you wanted to talk about parsnips, and then we can start talking about growing parsnips for seed.
I love parsnips. So they're a really nice crop that they were like one of the committed crops at Trill. There were a few kind of committed crops. So one was chard and one was parsnips. And we grew all sorts of other things, so like tomatoes, sunflowers, turnips, all sorts of lovely things. And all of these different seed crops pay different amounts when you grow them on contract, kind of thing. And parsnips were always kind of the lowest value seed. So in terms of like monetary input, they're right down there. But in terms of the joy they bring to the garden, they are so high on the list. Like, they're just such a lovely thing to include into any kind of organic, if you're interested in kind of building the pollinator numbers, natural predators, all of this kind of thing, because the flowers on them are just absolutely covered in insects. We were talking about doing some kind of like parsnip bathing sort of experience, a bit like forest bathing. But you if you get near to the flowers when they're like fully going for it, they're just buzzing, and it can make you feel a bit like woo. They're amazing crops. But yeah, they brought in kind of different sort of pollinators and insects that we'd never seen before in the garden. So I'd really recommend that as a kind of, I suppose, even if you weren't going to grow the seed from them, just as a kind of kind of natural pest management system. Leave a few parsnips in and see the insects come after them. But yeah, they're a biennial seed crop. So direct sown in the first year, and then you essentially take the first best roots and then transplant them to another location to go to seed in their next season. All of it's done outside, really nice. So we sow direct in May. A lot of people kind of complain about parsnip seed germination. It's a whole thing, but it's not really been a massive. I've never found it to be a massive problem. Sort of one of those things.
Is this because you have the perfect climate to germinate parsnips? Or is this because you have farm-grown seed that you're choosing the best stuff and it's fresh and you're using that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of growing, like working with farm-grown seed, undoubtedly. But I found that even that seed seems to last longer than people will often. It's like, 1-2 years, you've got to get rid of it. It won't germinate after that. But actually, I've found that it does last. It can last a lot longer than that. I mean, they are one of those. They can have a sort of a long period of germination. So a few might germinate, and then in a week, a few more will germinate, and then by week 2, all of them are there. And I suppose having kind of like these heavier soils and wetter springs, maybe it is perfect. I don't know. I can't tell you why. I can just tell you that it's happened.
So you sow them in May, and then you grow them like a vegetable.
Yeah. And so you're growing parsnips with vegetables. That's what you need to imagine. Don't mollycoddle them. Just do as you would. You just leave them to grow. So it's, very straightforward. Maybe weed them. That's pretty much all that you have to do.
You say maybe weed them. I would have assumed definitely weed them.
Maybe.
Let's say you were growing a market crop that is also going to have some for seed. What happens at harvest? Like, how are you choosing which roots are going to be your seed crop?
Generally, we would harvest the whole bed at the same time and just try and flog the rejects to a few shefts. and then we would keep the rest to replant. I've also visited other farms which like run box schemes, which do it in quite a different way. And they would just like, I've forgotten the name of the farm, but they would just harvest a few, they do the like harvest for their boxes. And if they find a nice one, they put it to one, like a really nice parsnip root, they'd put it to one side and just store that and then replant them all in the spring all together, which I think is quite an interesting way of doing it. And, that maybe just works for them because that's their production system and they're selling through boxes. And yeah, they wanted to use those in their boxes. Generally for the selection of the parsnips, we're looking for a kind of, it depends a bit on the variety, doesn't it? But generally we're looking for medium-sized roots, so not going for the really big ones and not going for the really small ones. We're also looking for sloping shoulders. So sometimes you can, and that's essentially to channel water so that it runs off of the top of the root rather than down into the growing tip. And there's a bit of diversity in that in the varieties that I've grown. Sometimes you get quite sharp, high shoulders, and then other like individuals are kind of more sloped. So we're sort of aiming for that. And I guess that's kind of it's just to kind of help the parsnips like avoid diseases and things like that. You don't want the kind of moisture pooling, stop it rotting in the top there. And so then they're in the ground, aren't they? We're planting them.
So once you harvest it, you're replanting right away?
Yeah.
Okay. Back to selection, just briefly. Are you looking at their leaves much?
The leaves? No, not especially.
Okay. Do you cut some of the leaf back before replanting?
Yeah. So that we'll do a kind of like those cut upwards, so it's really important to not damage the growing tip.
Kind of like a pointy triangle towards, like a cone towards the top.
Exactly.
Yeah. Inverse cone.
Yeah, we'll cut those back. That's an interesting thought about the leaves. But generally there's not really that, then it's not really thick growth or anything at that point because they kind of died down a lot over the winter.
So you're really choosing based on the root.
Yeah.
And then you're replanting them in another spot?
In a new spot. And I missed that point actually, because while those parsnips are growing in their first year, in the autumn, it's really important to prepare the bed for them that they're going to be transplanted into in our climate. So having a bed, maybe either kind of sowing a green manure in or something that you can kind of kill off with a tarp, or even mulching and then covering with a tarp, that kind of thing, just making sure it's ready to go and the parsnips can just go straight in there, because earlier on it can be a little bit difficult. And you're making sure, obviously, this is early spring, you're making sure that the plants haven't already started to shoot up.
Are you able to overwinter pretty much all your roots directly in the ground? Not parsnips, but like, are there any other crops that you might hold in a cold room and then replant in the spring?
I would say most of them I would hold in a cold room, but that's because of the like rodent damage that goes on. That's the major thing. And you just end up doing that thing of like, I've just got this horrible memory of going to grab a beetroot and then it just like crisps up in your hand and it's just like a husk because a rat or something has been in there and eaten it all out. No, the cold room is important, or shed or something like that.
Do the rodents not like the parsnips as much as other roots?
Yeah, they don't. Parsnips are a bulletproof crop for us. I mean, I guess it's getting people to eat them. This is going to be one of the subjects of my seed to table things will be parsnips.
Are they not as common a crop now as they may have been at one time?
Well, I would say they're pretty common, but people often say they don't like them. It's that sort of thing. I think they are, say, like in France, they call them, like they say, that's just pig food kind of thing. So, but for some reason in England, we're like, okay, let's keep going with them. But I think they're really like delicious, special, amazing root. And really, they are our kind of like ancestral crop. So they're, for that kind of connection to, what's fed people here for, I don't know, however long. They're quite an important one, I think, to grow and find ways of sort of enjoying them.
So they've survived the winter and they start to come out in the spring. Do you do anything special or you just let them go to flower?
Not really, other than replanting them at a wider spacing, so maybe 30 by 60 centimeters, that sort of spacing.
When you're replanting them, is that in the fall that you're planting them at larger spacing, or you plant them dense in the fall and then you replant them based on whatever survived? Maybe most of them have survived, but plant them to a larger spacing then.
Yeah, so everything survives pretty much. So in the autumn, we don't do anything. We just leave them. They overwinter. Absolutely fine. Dig them up in the spring. But what happens over the winter is all of the leaves and the parsnip will die down. And then in the spring, you'll start to see them regrowing. And it's kind of at that point that you start thinking, okay, these need to be selected and shifted into the new bed. So they're going up to seed. They're sort of they get quite tall. So they're a little bit taller than me, aren't they? So like just over 5.5 foot or something like that. They're quite tall plants, even when they're grown outside. At Trill, we always did quite rigorous staking of the parsnips, but I don't think I will be doing quite such rigorous staking. I think they're mostly fine because they're quite sort of airy plants. So I think they'll probably stand up, like find themselves. And I know lots of other growers that kind of do it that way. But there's something about when you're growing seed on contract, you just really want to look after it because there's someone like relying on you. Whereas when it's your own, you kind of feel a bit more confident to be like, okay, no, we're not gonna like do the staking on that one or something like that. Like it's an experiment. Okay, we'll learn next year. So we just let it go to seed, enjoy all of the amazing insects that these flowers are kind of attracting. And then it's, like seed harvest, which is, actually there is sometimes another level of selection that we might do on the plants themselves. Just if we feel like something isn't quite as it should in terms of the architecture of the plant, how it's going to seed, for example.
Once it's bolted and it has like a flower stalk, if it doesn't look right, I guess, or...
Yeah, I suppose off types is the kind of word for it. But yeah, if it's not how you want it to be, essentially, then, and you think might cause a problem for the seed production and you don't want those genetics to continue in the population, then take it out. That said, often I think those things can be environmental stresses rather than genetic ones, but sometimes it's just easier to kind of do the selection and then you're certain that it's not sort of part of that. And then usually we're harvesting the seed around about August time, sort of end of July, August. We harvest the individual umbels and we'll wait until, so I don't know if your listeners will be familiar with sort of what parsnip seeds, well, obviously they will know what parsnip seeds look like, but when they're on the plant, they're sort of, it's a kind of umbel, and they, trying to remember the botanical terms for it, but essentially they're kind of these structures which are made out of two seeds, and the seed head will go all papery, and then those two seeds will kind of split in two, and you'll just see a little kind of split between those seeds. And that's the point where we're like, right, okay, definitely ready to harvest. And we'll just go through the whole bed twice a week, snipping off with a pair of secateurs and a big bucket, snipping off all of these the umbels, which we think are mature, and then that will go straight onto a sheet in the polytunnel, and they'll dry out further. Now, and then dry out further so that they can be threshed, and we'll thresh the whole seed lot at the same time. If there's anything that was a cause for concern, so for example, it was really wet before we harvested this particular lot of seed, and we're not sure it will be the same quality as the previously harvest lot, then we might put that to one side and just do a little test on that separately, just to make sure. But generally, everything, if there's nothing big that's happened, everything can kind of go together. And something I think I learned on this podcast from Frank Morton was about, or maybe it was at the OSA conference, I'm not sure, but it's about so when you thresh these kind of like umbellifers, really good to wait until to do it in the early morning where there's still a bit more moisture in the air, because you don't end up with all those little sticky bits in your seed as well. And it's just much cleaner after you've threshed it. So that's something we always do now, and it's amazing. It's like, this is much better. And so kind of one of those obvious things as well. You're like, oh yeah, of course, that makes a lot of sense. And we'll do, in terms of cleaning the seed, when we were growing it for real seeds at Trill, we would have done a kind of rough sort of screen, getting out anything big. And then sometimes put it through the zigzag cleaner, but sometimes that wasn't always that easy. And real seeds were really generous and great. And they're just like, well, we've got all of these screens here. We've got a lot of equipment. We can do that last bit of cleaning so that it's exactly how they want it for sale. And that seems to work quite well, because they're really sort of experienced in that. And yeah, they can do a little bit of extra cleaning if they need to.
I have one more question. Do you have wild parsnip growing around?
No.
Okay, so it's a very common weed where we are. And
that is, could be a potential risk.
And you're just growing one variety a year?
It's much easier to do that.
So thank you for walking us through these parsnips. I'm going to ask you a couple questions. And so the first one is, what would you tell your younger seed growing self?
So I feel, even though I have like this experience of kind of growing seed at Trill at the Market Garden for years, I feel very early on in my seed growing journey. Now it's kind of so all encompassing, and I feel like I don't have a message. So can I ask your listeners to send me one? That would be fantastic. And now they've heard my story as well, so they'll be like, "Oh, I think get some more screens or something."
So I would love to hear what our listeners have to say to encourage your younger seed growing self. And what would you say to market growers, whether they're growing vegetables, herbs, or flowers, to inspire them to start growing seed on their farm?
A lot of the work is you're upright. And that is a big selling point for a lot of growers. There's none of this bending down business. I mean, I think, that's definitely a selling point. I think it's important to say that like seed growing isn't really easy. It's not like totally simple, particularly if you're growing in a kind of wet climate. It's actually quite hard. And for me, the really important thing is to surround yourself with a community of people who are excited about, interested in, and coming up against the same challenges as you are, because that is what really kind of feeds everything, and will kind of keep you going through through any kind of difficulties. Also, I think growing a kind of diversity of seed crops. I mean, in part, this is maybe people who've already dabbled a bit. This is advice for people who have already dabbled. Growing a few different seed crops can really improve your chances of success. So at Trill, Real Seeds always gave us a kind of handful of different things, maybe 3 crops that worked really well. And we know, we have the production system done. And then a couple which are either new or a bit of a kind of question mark of like, will this work? Won't this work? And then by having like a few different things, if there's a failure, it just doesn't feel as much of a disaster. So you've got, and that, that's the story of any kind of market garden, grower diversity. And, different years are different, aren't they? So some things will work and some things won't work as well. And it still, results in a kind of overall sort of success.
Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
Is there something that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
I mean, the one thing I haven't quite talked about that much is about the kind of challenges and opportunities in terms of growing seed in a market garden context, which might be interesting for listeners to hear about.
Why don't you tell us some?
I think there's so much opportunity, particularly in the UK, for growers to kind of diversify and grow seed. And it's something I'm really excited about. And really, I've had so much support over my kind of learning how to do this. And I really want to kind of be able to offer that to other people. Now, as like Winnow Farm Seeds, I also want to encourage people to kind of contract grow for us, essentially, in whatever setup that is, and be this kind of outlet for local seed, which is, there are a few brilliant seed companies in the UK, like Vital Seeds and the Real Seed Catalogue and Seeds of Scotland doing it at the moment, but it's not really abundant at the moment. So having a kind of outlet for that stuff, particularly for growers who aren't certified organic, is a really, I think, a really important thing. Yeah, so my advice to like these growers that are kind of like thinking, oh yeah, okay, how am I going to start growing seed? Is like, start with something that you absolutely love and that you're just really passionate about growing, and that you are like, you're good at growing it as the vegetable. There have been many times where I've like had, well, not so much anymore, but at Trill, I had pepper growing dreams for years that never came to fruition because we could never grow peppers there. Things are changing now. I'm at the new farm, but and choosing something that's not too hard, that you don't have to think about cross-pollination issues, just something straightforward, simple. Looking for gaps in your production system, so like physical space in your crop plan, but also looking for like time in your crop plan, or when you have a lot of labor around, so that you could be like, okay, we need a load of people to harvest this crop. It only takes a couple of hours, but you need that kind of like, for those people to kind of come together. If you're growing a seed crop, make a plan and plant it somewhere obvious. Don't make a seed section at the like far bottom corner of your space, your farm, somewhere you're passing every day, because it just like pops into your head then, especially when it's not part of your production system. It's so easy to kind of lose sight of those things. Make a plan before you make a plan while you're doing your crop plan for all of the equipment that you will need. Think through it step by step. Buy that equipment if you need to, or put it in a box so that it's ready to go when you're in at the point of harvest or processing, like with tomatoes and that kind of thing. And just to say really that growing seeds, if you're a good veg or flower grower, you can grow seed. It just takes a little bit of a mindset change in a way. You have to keep records. Maybe it's different in different countries, but there's quite specific records that need to be kept for different crops. They get inspected, for example. Some crops get inspected.
Is this for like organic certification or for other?
For plant health.
Okay. Yeah, no, we don't have in Canada, at least we don't have the same requirements for most crops, I don't think.
Yeah. So there's quite a few crops that will need a kind of inspection if you want to sell them via an online shop. And then in terms of just keeping, I suppose like the stakes get higher and higher as closer you get to harvest with a seed crop. So it's having an eye out for those kind of details throughout that process and not kind of getting fatigued towards the end, because that is your moment. And then the only other thing is I had like thought about was just a little bit about, I suppose, like in a sense, Brexit. Do you know what I mean if I say Brexit?
I do know. Yeah. I've been following the news.
In the UK, we had this referendum to leave the EU in like 2016. And then by 2020, we left the EU, and we are still in a real kind of messy point where we're trying to work out those kind of, it's had a really big impact on the seed sector in general. So in some ways, what an excellent time to start a local seed company, because, it's very hard to import seed at the moment, or especially a particular species. So it's like, hey, this is our moment in some ways. But then also there's this other kind of piece to it, which is that the government in lots of ways wants to say we are different from Europe in all sorts of different ways. And the way that's kind of come out in the seed world is like, we want you to do these extra tests now on these particular species, which is maybe okay if you're quite a big seed company, but it's actually they're prohibitively expensive for smaller seed companies, and especially companies like me that are just starting. And I, coming from a plant pathology background, I do understand the importance of all of this kind of plant health stuff. But at the same time, it needs to be in line with the level of risk. So, if you're doing a very small seed lot, perhaps there's a different way of testing these things. Actually, our plant health inspector is very supportive of us and is working with people to kind of try and make things a bit easier for small and medium-sized businesses, because it's not just people who are just starting out. It's a lot of medium-sized seed companies as well are kind of struggling a lot with the legislation changes, because also no one really knows what's happening.
I hadn't even thought to ask that question. So I think it's really valuable. I mean, it's an exciting time it's always an exciting time to start a business. And it's fun to hear both your confidence and your reticence as you're starting and all these new challenges. Have you started selling seed yet?
No. So that's the exciting next step on of the business.
When does your seed catalog go live? Will there be one this winter?
There will be one this winter. So I have a sort of a market coming up in a couple of weeks where I'm just going to sort out a few packets and sell them at this market in London, actually, which is a little way away, but it's quite an exciting kind of opportunity, which is at the Garden Museum at their Harvest Festival. So they've invited me to be there, which is really exciting. But then the actual online catalogue, we are aiming for December as the opening time. So hopefully we'll have a chance to process everything, germination tests, get it all into little packets, and press the open button.
If people want to find out more about you, or perhaps attend that live, or attends that launch of your web store, where should they go to find out more?
The website is www.winnow, winnowfarmseeds.co.uk. And I've also got an Instagram account, which is just at Winnow Farm Seeds, which we update weekly. So we'll have all of the updates there about the online shop and things like that.
So thank you so much, Ellen, for being on the show. I'm going to wish you a fantastic end of your first growing season on this site. And I hope you have a really great beginning of your seed sales period.
Thanks, Dan. It's been a real pleasure to be on here. Really kind of just sort of honoured to be asked at such a kind of, early sort of stage in the business. Well, just every opportunity is so sort of exciting at the moment. And I really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
And that's episode 20 of the Seed Farmer podcast. What's going on here at Turnasol? Well, we've brought in all the okra seed pods. We've also cut down whole plants of okra that have pods that are not quite mature yet to see how much they'll mature indoors and see how much seed we can get from them. We're probably going to get our first frost this week, so I wanted to get the okra into a warmer area and not lose the plants. We're also beginning our annual season review at the farm, where we look at everything from growing to selling to farm dynamics and see how we can make them all better next year. Have you started your own farm season review? I know. There's garlic to plant and the last crops to pull in and so many field materials to clean up. Does anyone really have time to do a season review at this time of year? Well, to make your season review a little bit more manageable, I've got a 5-video series that will walk you through all the steps you need to do to learn from last year. There's also a checklist to help you keep track of what you've done. If you want to watch the Season Review Challenge videos and get your annual farm review started, you can find them at www.seasonreview.farm. A huge thanks to Ellen for being on the podcast. There are links to Winnow Farm Seeds in the show notes. Do you have any advice for Ellen? Please send it my way and I'll make sure to get it to Ellen. A huge thanks to Sophia Sedelton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophiasedelton.com. Thank you so much for joining me in these conversations with seed farmers. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also pre-order the copy of my upcoming book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seed. The Seed Farmer podcast is produced in part by No-Till Growers with the help of our sponsors. Thank you, Michael, for all the post-production work you do. A huge thanks to everyone else at No-Till Growers for making this podcast happen. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss next episode. Until then, happy farming.